this is Lainey Cameron, and I can see we have already got people on the live feed today. Say hi, Paulette.
Hello, everyone.
And I know why we've got people on the live feed, because we picked a topic that has been highly requested by our audience. And I think the reason is it's so damn hard, okay? Damn, am I allowed that? Did we just make the thing explicit
You
again?
are.
Oh,
we just got
whatever.
an R rating.
Yeah. Anyway, it's so dang hard, right? The book blurb, the back cover description, it is like such an important element. We're going to talk a little bit about how there's research that says it's actually the most important element of your book other than the cover in terms of readers picking whether to read the book or buy the book. And we brought in the book blurb whisperer, Jessie Cunniffe from Book Blurb Magic, who I have worked with in various ways. So excited. We have got the expert. She's going to walk us through her formula. She's going to help answer questions about whether you do first person, third person, what goes in a book blurb, what doesn't. If you're watching live, feel free to put questions in the chat, in the comments. If we don't already have them on our list, we will try and add them. So before we jump into what is going to be just a stellar episode, you want to give us an update about how everything's going with you, Paulette?
Yes, definitely. I'm just winding down for my book launch. And the response for this book has been just phenomenal. It's just, when you write books, you hope people will enjoy them. And it's just been really great to hear the reader reactions to this. But beyond that, I have started outlining my next one, but I'm kind of giving myself a little bit of a break, a writing break to focus. I've been publishing kind of nonstop since my first book, was really in 2020. So it's been almost 5 years of just like publish, write. So the other piece is I'm really just kind of digging into Amazon ads for the first time in a long time. I have run them before. I think that there's a lot of, interesting dynamics happening in the marketplace right now. People are, they're dropping their social media. You're not going on Facebook. They're, not buying on Amazon. And that's really impacting, authors, in a big way. So I'm looking to kind of see if I can make a success out of the Amazon ads. Some people do better Facebook. Some people do Amazon. I've always been better on Facebook ads, but right now with the dynamic, I'm just going to dive in and I can report back in a little bit and see, how that's going. But yeah, so I'll be able to talk more about Amazon ads in the future. What's going on with you, Lainey?
Oh gosh. So on the one hand, I'm still, when I can, plugging away on revisions for my second novel. I'm teaching my class on book marketing. I'm going through my 12-week program right now. And I love it. I have so much fun doing that. On the other hand, my personal life is very challenging because my mom has been in the hospital for a couple of weeks. She just got out. She needs full-time care. I'm staying with her overnight. And so it's been, my hubby and I stay in the house. So it's been challenging. I'm exhausted. I'm not getting enough sleep, getting up multiple times per night. And I'm just, praying she gets better. She's in a lot of pain. She had a big infection and sepsis and all kinds of ugly stuff. So it's just on the personal level been, gosh, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. Just when you think it's getting like evening out, It goes flying up and down again. So life, it just keeps being lifey for us.
Life gets lifey. I think we need merch, y'all. So if you want merch, Life Gets Lifey, I'm really feeling like this should be a thing.
I think we both need to do a podcast wearing Life Gets Lifey t-shirts.
Merch. I'm going to make it. It's like it's happening, people.
We're doing it. We're doing it. Okay, well, let's introduce Jessie and get into our episode because this is so exciting. And I have worked with Jessie in the past. Hi, Jessie. And Jessie is joining us from, where are you, Jessie?
I'm in Sydney, Australia.
How is tomorrow?
It's pretty great, actually. It's sunny. Can't complain. It's a good Thursday.
So I was going to say that I've worked with Jessie in my book marketing program. We had Jessie teach part of my class on how to write book blurbs and help my class. We also did a webinar together. And I have actually signed up to work with Jessie myself on my own book blurb for my next book. And one of the things I like is Jessie takes this thing that can seem just so scary and hard and complicated and makes it seem easy. And that is the hardest thing in the world to do. And I like, one of my favorite things is anyone who makes something seem easy that I think is hard, like you're already on my I love you list. So we're going to hopefully do the same for the audience today, is help them see how to make this easy. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end about Jessie's different offerings. She helps in different ways. She is a professional book blurb writer, book description, for those who don't know what we're talking about. And she has lots of cool stuff. Her company is Book Blurb Magic. She does one-on-one stuff. She does classes. She does group programs, all kinds of fun stuff. So we'll talk more about that later. But let's get going into our first question.
Let's do it.
So let's just jump into the basics. When you talk about a book blurb, what is it? What are we talking about here, Jessie? Help us, please.
Yes, of course. It's funny. I always feel like this is the most obvious question that a lot of people actually don't even ask, because everyone thinks that they know what a book blurb is, I find. And there are actually a couple of different definitions. So we need to be careful in terms of miscommunication particularly between trad publishing and self-publishing as well. So the definition of book blurb that I use is that back cover book description. When you pick a book off your shelf, you flip it over, find out what it's about. It's like, it looks like a kind of summary of the story. It gets you excited to read it. It's not a summary, as we're going to find out. So I'm going to just flag that word right there. But that's essentially what it looks like. And of course, this pops up on Amazon, wherever you're selling your books online as well. You have that, dreaded book description box that you have to fill. It's usually about 150 to 200 words. You're usually like, how do I fit my story into that many words? This is ridiculous. But the other definition of blurb, which I do just want to kind of highlight because it does still pop up, and it's actually the original definition of blurb, is those endorsement quotes that lots of us have a love-hate relationship with, because sometimes you flip over the book and there's just endorsement quotes from people you don't care about. And interestingly, I think it was Simon and Schuster who recently said they were doing no more blurbs, no more. And by that, they don't mean no more book descriptions. They mean no more endorsement quotes. They're like, it's not working. Social proof is important, but it doesn't matter if people don't know who's giving the quote. So really interesting. I think we're seeing some movement away from endorsement quotes. So occasionally I get, a confused person message me and think that they can pay me to write an endorsement quote for their book. That's not what Book Blurb magic is about. I'm here to help you write the back cover book description, the online book description. When I say blurb, that's what I mean.
And how important is it? Like we called this episode book blurbs that sell, but how important is a blurb in selling your book?
I wish that I had more hard data on this, but of course it's one of those things. Like one day I'll do a big range study. I'll have some kind of tech that can measure it. But something that I think that is really interesting is I've had several clients message me their NetGalley stats. Like you get a little graph, and the reviewers basically say, what kind of pushed them into choosing this book to, review or whatever. And consistently my clients came back to me, and the cover is there, the title is there, I think, book blurb, a couple other things. Consistently, of course, cover ranks super high. Like we know this, we know the covers are important. But in some cases, it's so close with blurb that they're actually they're pretty much on a par with each other. And I think that they're really exciting stats to see. They're the only hard stats I can refer you to. But there are editors, publishers who kind of estimate that the blurb is responsible, 60 to 80% responsible for the reader's buying decision. Now, again, they're numbers that feel like they've been pulled out of the air, but they do really kind of ring true. I had a client message me just the other day that said once she changed her blurb with me, her sales went up. And so this is obviously not something I can promise. There's a lot of factors in book sales, but it is something that we do see consistently when a book is flagging and we change the blurb. If there are no other issues, if the blurb is the stumbling point, then changing it can have a really significant, measurable impact. And the way that I like to think of it is the cover sells the click, the blurb sells the book. It's your stories, light bulb moment, right?
Yeah.
So it's your story's first impression. It's your story's first impression. So the cover is the first pretty genre impression, title impression. Maybe you have some Easter eggs on the cover that really appeal to your ideal, audience. But the blurb is actually your story's first impression. And obviously that goes for nonfiction as well as fiction, and we'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, that's your book's first chance. The content of the book, it's the first time that it gets to shine.
And you said 150 to 2. Sorry, go ahead, Paulette.
No, go ahead.
You said 150 to 200 words. Is that the ideal for what a book blurb should be?
Ideally, yes. Blurbs are getting shorter. So even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, I was writing blurbs that were consistently 200. Sometimes for an epic fantasy, you go over that, 210, 220. You pick up the average book now, and on the back cover, it's 50 to 100 words sometimes. It's really, I don't know, you can call it the TikTok age, whatever. Our attention spans are getting shorter, blurbs are getting shorter. So I try to stick these days to as tight as 150 as I can. I will say for some nonfiction books, like instructionals, occasionally self-help, you will hit 200. Occasionally you'll go a tiny bit over it, depending, because and it does depend on sort of your content as well. But I find the sweet spot tends to be somewhere around 170 to 180. And that's where a lot of blurbs start to fall. Again, there's some variance for genre, but right now, my advice is definitely don't go above 200. Try not to go above 180, with some very small exceptions.
So let's get into like the anatomy of a book blurb. Let's like talk. What are like the parts of a book blurb? What are the elements of a good book blurb in your view?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is interesting. And I mean, I love that you called it anatomy of a book blurb, because we know this is my free cheat sheet. That'll be linked. We can have a chat about that a little later as well. But a lot of authors come to me and they're worried that using a formula for a book blurb is going to make their blurb sound formulaic. And that is just it. I mean, it can be the case depending on how flexible the formula you use is. So I like to kind of say that I have a framework rather than a formula. I think I do use the word formula in my course, but like I've gradually moved away from that towards framework is probably more accurate. And the reason this is because we always have expectations of various text types. If you read the care label on your shirt, you're not expecting a beginning, middle, end narrative flow. But if you read a book blurb, you are expecting some kind of structure, right? So to an extent, yes, we follow a formula, but every book blurb should be as unique as your book in terms of its content. So your average book blurb is approximately 3 paragraphs, give or take. Doesn't always perfectly fit into those 3 paragraphs, but they're kind of roughly 3 sections. Now, fiction and nonfiction blurbs do have some important differences, which I'll kind of touch on here. But I also want to say fiction and nonfiction is kind of a little bit of a lie in terms of the 2 blurb types. It's actually more like narrative and non-narrative. And in my cheat sheet, I do refer to them as fiction and nonfiction because it's just a little simpler. But for example, if you're a memoir author, I'm going to be using the fiction style blurb because you're writing a narrative piece, right? Some self-help or even historical books sometimes fall into narrative as well. So when I say fiction and nonfiction, I actually mean narrative and non-narrative. So non-narrative being like how-to books, manuals, instructional, all that kind of stuff that don't necessarily have a linear story. So if we're writing the fiction type, for all blurbs, we want to start with a hook, which is the headline. So that's actually for fiction or nonfiction. I shouldn't have started with fiction there, but for all blurbs, we want a hook. So this is the headline. It's like, you can think of it as like the clickbait of your book, but obviously you don't want it to be clickbait. You want to make good on your promise, right? But it should be that hooky, interesting thing that readers, get interested in. It's often bolded. Sometimes on your physical back cover, it'll be in a different font. It'll be a bigger font. On Amazon and things, it's often one of the only things readers can see before they click read more. So it's super, super important. It should be right up the top of your book blurb. Always makes me cry a little bit when I see people dump reviews and random stuff up the top of their book blurb, and they use that precious real estate where we could be getting straight into the hook and the story for other things. So hook, for fiction and nonfiction, that's what we want up the top. It's usually 1 to 2 sentences, something really short and snappy. It's often the hardest part of the blurb. I have an entire masterclass just on hooks. I have an entire article just on hooks because it's just its own. It's probably the most creative part of the blurb. It's when I start to feel like I'm in an ad agency trying to think up a slogan. Like that's what it sort of feels like. So that,
and how
I think,
important are keywords when you're writing a hook? Like in the metadata aspect of things.
I never prioritize keywords over great writing when it comes to the blurb. Like we always want to prioritize something that reads really beautifully. If you're trying to keyword stuff, it often compromises the writing. So if a keyword fits into the hook, great. The hook is often where I try to get tropes in up front if we've got a very tropey book. But never force it. Like it's got to be good writing first and foremost. If it's good writing, people will read it. And keywords, I've got a few tips for how to get keywords in a little bit later, but I don't stress too much about necessarily having them up the top. Probably the thing I focus on the most is tropes. Like if we know, like in romance, readers looking for particular tropes, I try to get that into the hook as much as possible so that they're like, yes, this is the trope I want, and then they keep reading. So that's sort of what I would focus on there. Then for fiction, we usually get into a setup paragraph. So this has to tell us where we start in like chapter 1. Don't worry about the prologue. Don't worry about backstory. This is where people get really bogged down. Literally take us like, where is your character at the very start of the story, right? When we start in present time. And then if any backstory is needed to make the present time make sense, you contextualize it after the fact. So introduce the character and then introduce whatever details you need. If you start with, ever since so-and-so was 6 years old, they've done blah, 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 and blah, it makes the book sound like it's following them from 6 years old, right? So, but if you say so-and-so has always been afraid of the dark because when she was 6, this happened, then we instantly get context, but we know that we're dealing with an adult, right? So there's that's the main thing in the setup paragraph. A lot of authors get bogged down in backstory, which is totally understandable because in your head, you're like, this is all connected. They have to know the backstory in order to know what's going on now. They don't. You need to like introduce them to where the character is now. Any backstory or background is only on an absolute need to know basis and always contextualize after the fact. That's kind of my biggest tip for that paragraph. Moving through, we then need to kind of flesh out the plot a little bit. The second paragraph might be where you introduce a secondary character, but the most important thing we're going to start to move into, and this is why I don't say 3 paragraphs is set in stone, because sometimes this happens in paragraph 1, sometimes it happens in paragraph 2. We need to get into the inciting incident. So often you have like setup, inciting incident, then we've got to raise the stakes. That's kind of the flow in a nutshell. So when we're going into the inciting incident, this is like the thing that happens that means your character has reached the point of no return. Someone dies, something gets blown up, someone, I don't know, has to move house, like whatever it is, it's the thing that actually kicks your story off. And interestingly, it can often feel like a spoiler to you. Like you can kind of go, oh, but this is like, isn't this too much of the story? No, it's a whole reason your story is happening. It's a whole reason that people actually are reading your book. There is no story without the inciting incident. And this also gives weight to the stakes when we get into those later on as well. So we do actually need, you don't need to give every detail of the inciting incident. There might be aspects of the inciting incident that are a bit spoilery that you do want to save, but we need to kind of know like what's the big explosion moment, like what's changed, what's forever changed in this character's life. And like I say, so that might be
like focus on the impact of the inciting incident rather than describing what it is. Like, is that a way to get around
100%.
it?
100%. So we're describing the inciting incident in the context of like, what does it mean for the character? So yeah, you don't have to go into heaps of detail around like, especially if you have a very detailed inciting incident, we need to know like if they have to move home, but they're broke, right? Like they don't have the money to move or that kind of thing, right? So we definitely need to know the impact of the inciting incident on the main character is the most important thing. 100%. And that might be where you introduce a secondary character as well. And then moving into the last paragraph or so of the blurb, this is where we raise the stakes. So this is where we need to understand what the character stands to lose. And if you've set up your inciting incident properly, then we should understand the core tension of the book. And it's easier to build up these stakes. This is often where authors get stuck because you're sort of like, well, how far into the story do I go? What do I give away? I can't give away spoilers. People start getting really vague. It's raising the stakes really requires you to kind of get creative with foreshadowing, while also sort of being specific. And this is the thing, like often when I'm sitting in like my one-to-one blurb audits, the main thing we're doing with the stakes is I'm like, you've just said, when secrets emerge, the darkness threatens to swallow them. And I'm like, what like is the secret that you have a crush on your neighbor, or is the secret that you killed your mother? Like there's a huge range of secrets here, right? Like, so we need to actually, you have to kind of give us an inkling of what level those secrets are on for a start, and where is this darkness coming from, and how does it, so like, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's not about more words, and it's not even necessarily about more description. It's just about being a tiny bit more specific. And I think that's possibly one of the trickiest things to learn about book blurbs, especially because you're used to, like, when people are like, what's your book about? You're like, quick, hold all the spoilers. Like, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm going to tell you the first few little bits, and then like, that's it. So you actually have to have the spoilers in the forefront of your mind when you're raising the stakes, and you have to go, right, how specific can I be about telling them what path we're going on without actually telling them where the path ends up?
I went through this with my blurb that I'm gonna show you when I get there for my second book. And one of the things I was struggling with is it's so heavy with backstory. And my character killed someone when she was a child. And I really struggled with, like, does this belong in the blurb? Does it belong in the description? Does it belong? And in the end, I realized that, like, the more I told people that, the more interested they got in the book. And so I realized like, oh, wait, if that is the thing that when I'm having a conversation with someone, it makes them go, wait, tell me that again. Wow, that's interesting. Then it belongs in the blurb, right? If it's the thing that's actually starting a conversation and getting someone interested in person, getting someone interested. And so I had to get over it and go like, we're no longer going to say she has a dark secret from her childhood. We're going to say what happened.
Well, and this is the thing. If people find that out real quick, like if that's in the prologue, for example, you can put it in the blurb. Like you can. If we're talking about something that's more like past Act 1, that's when you want to go, okay, we're not going to tell them that info. I do sometimes get authors say, oh, this blurb only talks about like a really small part of my book. I'm like, that's actually the point. It's going to feel a little bit weird because it should only really be kind of talking us through Act 1 and then giving us a signpost. It's interesting. I saw an agent talking about this on Threads the other day. They're like, if I can't see where your story is going to go from your query, which is mostly a blurb, right? They're like, I'm going to pass, right? So it's about saying, hey, here's the path we're going on, but you can't see the end of it. That's probably the best analogy I can kind of think of for that. And I think this brings me back to the word summary, because as you might have kind of figured out from this structure, we're not summarizing your book. And this is the number one thing that gets in authors' way, like genuinely the number one confusion. There are articles online when you Google how to write a book blurb that say, summarize your plot without spoilers. A summary is boring. A summary, I don't write synopses for a reason because I find them boring. I only write book blurbs, right? And book blurbs get to be exciting because their job is to sell, their job is to tease, to create curiosity. A summary is what you go on Wikipedia to look up the whole plot, right? That's the summary. It has everything, spoilers and all. That's what a summary is. And so when you write a summary that stops where the spoilers start, you actually just drop your readers off a cliff. There's no momentum. They're just like, well, this is a okay half of a book, but I don't know what's happening. And this is probably why your blurb is too long. It's probably why you can't decide what belongs in there or not. And it's probably why you just feel like it falls flat. Is because you're approaching it like a summary. And so summary and synopsis we can use interchangeably. Blurb is its own thing. Blurb, book description, we can use interchangeably, but never the two shall meet, okay? Because it's summarizing is killing your book blurb, essentially.
Cool. And sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I just saw a comment from Beth that I kind of want to jump into. Going to interrupt both of you. I'm sorry. Beth has said I put something from Act 3 out of 4 in my blurb. Maybe I need to reconsider that. 100% reconsider that, because this is the other little bias that happens in readers' brains when they're reading a book blurb. We expect the book blurb to be only the beginning part of the book. If you put your Act 3 thing in there, they're going to assume that's the beginning of the book. It totally throws the pacing off for them. So it actually can change the reading experience of your book, because they're then reading Act 1 going, where's this Act 3 thing? Where's this Act 3 thing? What's happening? I thought this was in the beginning. I thought this was the inciting incident. I thought this was what kind of kicked the story off. And then it can fall really flat for them once they get to Act 3. And I've seen some appalling, like, in trad publishing, actually, I've seen some appalling examples of this, where it makes it sound like the whole point of the inciting incident is actually the end of the book. So then you read the inciting incident, you're like, okay, I don't really know what's happening. I thought this was the point of the story. And then you get to the end and realize it's kind of been spoiled for you by the blurb. And that's when you get some people who are so scarred by blurbs, they're like, I never read them because they spoil the story for me, which they shouldn't do. Like, if you're doing a blurb properly, it shouldn't spoil. So 100%, really, really important thing about book blurbs is having the pacing matching your book. And if Act 3 is in the blurb, it's going to make it sound like that's part of Act 1. So it's a great question and something to fix. Sorry, I'm giving you homework.
No, it's great. So question for you, because that's like one thing not to put in the blurb. So sometimes there's conversations about, how many characters you put in, how many plot points you put in. Can you just address like what are some of the big don'ts when it comes to book blurbs?
I got pulled up on this by a client recently, because I always say, don't put, like, if you can manage it, don't put any more than 2 names in the blurb, like 2 character names. Names are a lot for readers to process because they don't immediately create any imagery. So you have to try and connect them to, their so-and-so's sister, or give them their job title or whatever, so that we can picture them. If you have a whole bunch of names, that's a whole lot of space in your blurb that's not actually creating any imagery for your readers. And imagery is so cool in blurbs, because if I say, it's like the old thing of, if I say yellow elephant, you can't stop thinking about a yellow elephant. I'm like, don't think about it. You're still thinking about it, right? Imagery actually implants your story into people's brains without them even trying. So if you can get great imagery into your blurb, it's just going to transfer your story into their head, right? So the more names we have in there, the more that gets diluted. I sort of cap it at a max of 3 if you absolutely have to. However, working with a client last week, she has got 5 POVs in her book, and we included all of them in the blurb because she's introducing a team of people who are then going to be solving mysteries in the rest of her series, right? So we're not going to do that in every single blurb because obviously every book is going to focus a bit more on just 1 or 2 of the people. But in the first book, I'm like, well, we need to kind of know the team we're going to be hanging out with. So there are ways around it, but you do have to do a very different blurb structure from what I've just described here. And I'd consider it an advanced technique. What happens most often, because I haven't done it that much, what happens most often is even if you have like 6 POVs or even 3 POVs, people are like, oh, I think I need all 3 POVs, but the blurb's too long. There's always 1 or 2 characters who are the most important. And it's not to say that the third character isn't important too, but they might not drive the plot as much. So then you need to prioritize the 2 who drive the plot, and then readers can fall in love with character number 3 in the book. That's totally fine. So what happens most of all is that you realize we don't need more than 2, max 3 people in the blurb. But there are contingency plans for if you have, I think the most I did was there was 9 POVs in the book and I got 6 into the blurb, and that was,
wow.
I never want to do that again.
Epic fantasy, I'm hoping.
Epic.
Please
Yes.
say epic fantasy.
It was epic
thank
fantasy.
So I know we mostly have fiction folks listening to our podcast just because we know a lot of the audience and they talk to us all the time, and we love that, by the way. Talk to us. We love it when you tell us what you want to hear next, like this episode. But what about nonfiction? Is there a big difference that you want to point out when someone's writing a nonfiction blurb?
So I think the main thing, if we look at nonfiction in the scheme of non-narrative, because like memoir writers, I'm throwing you in with the fiction, that same fiction structure, right? Because you're telling a story. If we look at non-narrative, which is mostly self-help / instructional, that kind of thing, readers often read the blurb in a slightly different way. They're much more likely to skim, because if you want to learn how to do woodwork, specifically with, I don't know, a specific kind of saw you just bought, I know nothing about woodwork. If my dad is listening, he's going to be so ashamed. But then you pick up this book and you're going to skim through the back and go, does it teach me how to use this saw, right? Like that's what I'm looking for. So very often people are looking for a specific thing. If the self-help book about setting boundaries, 100% that person is picking up that book thinking about their difficult friend and that one, and they're looking for things that will help them with that one relationship, right? So I'm actually a very big fan of using bullet points in a non-narrative blurb. So we still have our hook. Hook is non-negotiable, same deal as for fiction / narrative blurbs. Your opening paragraph, the goal here is to resonate with your reader and to make sure that they understand you understand them. So if it's, a vegan cookbook, it's like, have you tried, being a vegan, but it's so complicated and there's too much information online. Well, here's like the simplest way to learn, right? It's that kind of thing. So you really want to show them, I understand your problem and I have the solution. Second paragraph, you move into qualifiers. So whether that's you having credentials, I'm a such and such, dietitian with X number of years experience, blah, blah, blah. Or if you are super new and you have no credentials and you're writing this from your personal experience, you focus on the cool ideas and the different approaches that you take in your book. Like what's different about your book? What is it that it can teach people that maybe they haven't learned before? Is it easier, simpler, faster? Is it just a shorter book when all the books in that genre are really big and take forever to read through? Like what is the thing that you're doing differently? And then we just go straight into bullet points and one line to close. So the bullet points, they're a bit of an art to do. Like they're a whole kind of thing. But essentially, you want to be highlighting the benefits of your book and what it can give your readers. So rather than just saying, it's got a 5-page meal plan, you might want to say 5-page meal plan, so that you never fail your diet again, for example. Do you know what I mean? So like we're actually highlighting the benefits. What's the benefit of having that meal plan? You don't have to think, or it's, these meals can be prepped in 5 minutes or whatever. I'm writing cookbook blurb this week. It's stuck in my head. So that's the kind of thing that readers want to know. Like, what is it going to actually give them? Around about 5 bullets is enough. Like it's a kind of sweet spot. And then like one line to close. By the time they've skimmed through those bullet points, now is not the time to bombard them with more information. One really strong line about taking action, or like, this is what this book is going to give you. It's time to do this, whatever. And then something I haven't mentioned, but is very important for both types of blurb, you want a CTA or a call to action. So this is more for your online book description than your back cover book description. But the call to action basically says, click buy now to, experience the magic of vegan cooking today, whatever it is, right? This just, authors get understandably uncomfortable about asking for the sale. We were talking just before, Paulette, before we came on live about like, it feels like spam when you talk about your own stuff, right? Like even I feel like that too. I write a newsletter 5 days a week. I email people 5 days a week. It took me a long time to get brave enough to do that because I was like, oh my gosh, like no one's going to be interested in blurbs 5 times a week. Turns out that's not the case. And I'm very lucky. I love my email list. If you're here, like you're the best people. But I think it's important to be brave enough to ask for the sale because you believe your book could help somebody or give them enjoyment, right? Which is helping them also, actually. So you're actually doing them disservice if you're like, oh, here's the book, like, and that's it. People like to be told what to do next. When we're online, there's so many options to click and scroll and go elsewhere. So a really simple, like, click buy now to get such a day. It's actually not as intrusive as you think. Maybe you don't put it in like huge caps lock and scream in them unless that's your jam. That's also fine. But it's actually okay to tell them like, here's where to go next. You're helping them. So that's for your online book descriptions for both of those. And I will just quickly say, because people do ask me, I do use the same blurb for the back cover as for the online book description, just minus the CTA for your physical cover.
Cool.
Right,
and I saw
we got
one
a good
comment.
question in the thing.
Yeah,
do you want to take that? Cool.
Sure. Let's take the one from Leslie. I think it's a really interesting question. So Leslie's asking, what about comparing with other books in your blurb, especially your online blurb, right? Like it's lessons in chemistry meets Sex in the City kind of thing. Like, do you like to do comparisons with other books, or are you no, never put that in your blurb?
I hate comp titles. That's my hot take for the day. I hate comp titles, mostly because they have only ever misled me. Like the amount of times I've seen a comp title that I hate and then have loved the book that they're like, but let's talk through this. So there's a couple of advantages. If you were to say something like this novel is a cross between Lessons in Chemistry and Sex in the City, the cool thing is that those titles then go into your blurb as keywords, and people potentially searching those books, if your book is legitimately like them, may find your book too. So that is a decent argument for putting comp titles in that online thing. I know you have to do comps for queries as well. I know that it's not particularly helpful of me to say I hate comp titles, but this is an interesting discussion that I've sort of been having with my audience as well. They don't help people anywhere near as much as we think that they do. They might help agents and publishers because they're going, what marketing box can I put you in? But in terms of helping readers, if that's your primary motivation, they're not as helpful as you think they are. And the thing that you risk doing, like reading is subjective, right? And no matter how much you think your book is like Lessons in Chemistry, what if someone had a really different experience of Lessons in Chemistry? Or I know some people really dislike it because there's something graphic. I haven't read it, something graphic in the first couple of chapters. What if, yes, your book is like, I don't know, the good parts of Lessons in Chemistry, but someone really hated that there was violence in it and therefore is like, not reading your book. But your book has no violence in it, right? It's like the other parts of Lessons in Chemistry. So you run the risk of alienating people unnecessarily with comp titles. And you also run the risk of people being like, well, this is nothing like Sex and the City. I had a completely different experience of Sex and the City and your book is nothing like it. But maybe to you, your book does feel exactly like your experience of Sex and the City. So that's a tricky thing with comp titles. If you're super confident, they can be decent keywords. I wouldn't go dumping more than like 2. Like you've got 2, Lessons in Chemistry, Sex and the City. Cool. So I can see the argument for them helping keyword-wise. I don't think they help readers as much as people like to think that they do. That's my hot take.
I mean, that's another place. There are lots of other places you can use the comparisons and social graphics. You can add it to your A+ content. There's other places on the page where you can reference those. I know that sometimes Amazon changes their policies around in terms of what they allow in terms of other author references. A couple of years ago, they were really discouraging people from using other author references in your book blurb. So I pulled all of mine out. So there's that other piece too, especially if you start having a big backlist, if you have lots of book references in there, not only do opinions change, but they kind of have to maintain them over time. So it's another complication, I think, too.
And I mean, the other thing to remember in this great day and age where people get cancelled is if something happens with the author, it might be the best comp title in the world, but if that author suffers a hit, it could potentially damage, your book's reputation as well. So I feel that they're risky and not like worth the payoff, but I see the argument in terms of it potentially being a useful keyword. As you say though, Amazon, like I know they were really discouraging people from doing that a while back, and now you kind of can, but I'm just not sure they're the most helpful things. I hope that was a helpful answer. I know I feel very strongly about comp titles.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
I never put them in. I never put them into the blurbs that I write. I never do that. If authors, my clients want to add it afterwards, that's totally fine. But I don't ever actually put them in.
There's so many good questions here. What do we want to go to next, Lainey? Do you want to?
Okay, I think we had a question about the hook, and I often see people like in romance novels, they put a question, right? Like, will they get together? Will true love triumph? Well, whatever. What's your take on questions for the hook? Yes or no? Love them, hate them?
I love questions for the hook. I don't love questions for the end of the blurb. So those will they, won't they questions is I had a client I worked with, and her book got picked up by Penguin after we did the blurb, which was really exciting. And they actually kept the blurb as is, like what we'd worked on together, except they put a question at the end. And like, I think trad publishers, potentially it's a trend at the moment to put questions at the end. I personally don't like them. I don't think it ruined the blurb, just for the record. Like Penguin know what they're doing. But it's really interesting to me. I think it's a bit of a trend, and then potentially you might find that it becomes dated down the track. Question for the hook. If it's the right question, it's fabulous. The question you want to ask is the kind of question that your readers can get involved in. So if you can say, like, can a broken heart ever love again? It might not be the most original question, but we can actually think about that. If you ask, can Jenny ever love again? Don't know Jenny yet. Like, do I care? Probably not. Sorry to be callous. But like it doesn't hit home. But if it's a question that the reader can actually, is it wrong to always blah? Like these kind of sort of controversial perhaps questions, like that get to the crux of what your character is struggling with, but also invite the reader in to put themselves in their shoes and ask that same question to themselves. Fabulous. So I love question hooks. They can be overdone, but like if you have a great question, go for it. The end question, here's my challenge to you, right? And I'm talking about both of these because Lainey, I'm sure if you've read my emails, you know how I feel about questions. You're baiting me here. So a question at the end, I'm really not a fan of will questions. So if we say, will they find their way back together or are they doomed forever? We just know the answer is read the book and find out. And also we know the answer is probably not, because this is a nice fluffy romance. So it doesn't actually do much to raise the stakes.
Oh my God, you're going to hate my book blurb when you see it. I've got the statement at the top and the question at the end, and I'm a hot mess, y'all. So I know you're in Australia, but I'm gonna be banging on your door like in an hour.
Get rid of my question. So like will questions are just they're often like almost like rhetorical questions. Like we're kind of like we don't really care about the answer. If you change them to can, you can often save a will question. So I don't know what it is about like can, but it feels a little less certain, a little less set in stone, right? And so even though like, can they find their way back together, or, is their love doomed, feels just a little less certain than will they find, I don't know. It's just, I just feel that it kind of gives us a little more doubt in a good way. But one thing that I do like to challenge authors to do, if they're really in love with a question at the end of their blurb and like it's not terrible and it's fine, I still challenge them to say, hey, write this as a really strong statement instead. Just try it. Just write the question out as a statement. And like 9.5 times out of 10, they come back and they're like, oh my God, I love the statement more. So like I will say, I think it is really interesting. The trad publisher, like the one thing they changed about my blurb was they put a question at the end. So if you want to ride the trend and you want to do that, go for it. The big trad publisher is doing it. It's obviously not doing terribly for them. And it's potentially a sort of formula / trend that like in particular romance authors are learning to expect right now. But just be aware that it could be dated in a year, 2 years, whenever as well. And you could be like, oh, remember when we all put questions at the end of our blurbs? And then, if you have a lovely statement at the end, like that's not going to go out of fashion. There are absolutely times when a question at the end is the right call. I don't want to scare everyone off all questions. Just see if you can do better. Write it as a statement. If the statement is better, then mostly the whole blurb feels better. So yeah, that's questions.
So we have way too many questions for our 1 hour
I
here.
know,
So
I
I'm gonna
know.
try something for a second. I want to try like a speed round. Okay. So we're gonna do just 2 or 3 questions that are very specific and like, let's see if we can do a speed round on these, and then we're gonna get into the really icky, hard ones around trigger warnings, and
I love
spoilers,
it.
and AI, and all kinds of stuff. But let's try a speed
I
round.
love
So
it.
first question: present versus past tense.
Present.
Always present.
Always present.
Okay, easy. Third person versus first person.
Oh, that's not a quick fire question. That's a
No?
whole
Okay.
conversation.
Could go either way. Okay. So could go either way. Both can work. There's not a never do first
Both
person.
can work. Third person is the gold standard.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say that.
Perfect. Blurbs and leading with awards, or someone else talking about the book instead of a regular hook.
Unless the person is like, I don't know, Stephen King, and you're a horror writer, like, no. Just start with your hook. Don't start with like a Goodreads reader review. I get that they are totally awesome and you're super proud of them, and you should be, but they can go at the bottom of your blurb if you want, although that's technically against Amazon guidelines. So just people do it, people get away with it, but just heads up, it's not actually allowed.
Okay. Can I add to the speed round just really quick before the sponsor break? So what about like if your book is part of a series or a standalone, and like if it's a later book in the series, adding it to standalone or where it sits in the series, is that ever good at the top?
Not at the top. Oh, okay. I would tend to put that at the bottom.
I do
like
standalones, but they're numbered, for instance. So I want people to know that my book 4 is like they don't have to read book 1 through 3 before they read 4.
So just very recently, I was talking to a client of mine who writes a lot of romance books, and she's actually quite sort of experienced in this. And she's been experimenting with putting at the very top, each book follows a different couple in the series, so showing that they're all interconnected standalones, and she said that does really well. So that's a newer thing. Like, genuinely, I was only talking to her about that a couple of weeks ago. So I would say there's an argument for like, giving readers a heads up, especially if they can read that book on its own. I think that is actually doing well at the moment. It may not in a few years, but at the moment I think you can go for it.
Okay, great. So we're going to take a short sponsor break. And this was actually kind of fun because we don't have a sponsor this week. So our short sponsor break is, Jessie, tell us about the special offer that you have. Seeing as I know you have a special offer if people go and download your Anatomy of a Book Blurb, right?
I do. So if you go to anatomyofabookblurb.com, it's not the easiest URL, is it? If you go there, then you will get the page to download my free cheat sheet, which takes you through the fiction and the non-fiction structures in a little bit more detail. Like, you've got a whole page of detail to kind of keep by your bedside and review as you need to when you're writing blurbs, rather than trying to remember everything I've just said. And then once you've downloaded that, don't refresh or close the page or anything, because it will go to a new page that will offer you my Book Blurb Magic course for just $37 instead of $67. But once you click away from that page, it's gone forever. And I think you have 10 minutes before the offer expires. So it is a bit of a quick one, but I do just want to reward people who are really, really keen to write their own blurbs and get really good at it. Book Blurb Magic course is my original course. It has had hundreds and hundreds of students through it and really great reviews. A lot of people find that that's all they need to write fantastic blurbs without any further help from me. It covers both fiction and non-fiction, or narrative and non-narrative blurbs for pretty much all genres. If you're specifically a spicy author, I have someone else for you we can talk about later, but if you're in the fiction and non-fiction camps generally, anatomyofabookblurb.com, get the free cheat sheet. It'll put you on my newsletter list, which is a lot of free information. And you'll also get a 10-minute offer for Book Blurb Magic at its absolute cheapest, $37.
Awesome. Good deal. Thanks. I'm glad you shared that. And
Thank
Paulette, seeing as we have a couple of minutes in our sponsor segment, and your new book just came out, and it's fabulous. If anyone hasn't read it yet, it kind of blew my mind on diet culture. We were talking earlier about cookbooks and diet culture. There it is. What we give, it is giveaway. It is beautiful. It is fabulous. But Paulette, just tell us a little bit about how it's going in the world, because I know you're getting some feedback that is making you cry as you get this book into the world. So don't cry, but tell us about the feedback.
I think it's been overwhelming. People are like life altering. Like, I'm getting like these reviews that are just people feel changed after reading it, which is really amazing, because it's basically, for those that are familiar with what I write spicy women's fiction, plot-driven romance kind of in that intersection. And this one takes on the issue of weight and body size. It has a second chance romance. It has a Puerto Rican couple. We have someone who's got like some eating disorder issues with a chef. So there's natural tension there. People love the food. I have recipes on the website, y'all. So if you want to go to paulettesouth.com, get the recipes on the book page, you can do that. So yeah, it's just been a really positive experience, and I'm just trying to figure out how to get the book in as many people's hands as possible. If you've read the book and you enjoy the book, please tell a friend, leave a review, send me an email, whatever. So thank you, everyone. Everyone go read it.
Sounds awesome.
It's amazing. I thought that I was kind of educated on this topic, and it blew my mind on several of the things around diet culture that I was like, how was I misled? And how was I so out of sync with what all the studies actually say these days? So blew my mind. And I love anything that takes my perceptions and twists them around and says like, nope, you did not understand the way the world works. You had it wrong. And I'm like, yeah, I had it wrong.
The one thing that was kind of weird is that people keep saying they can't wait for the next one, and this is the last one. So I'm like, oh.
Well, maybe it's not the last one. Maybe someone sees her work on television and it affects them, and there's another character to come. Who knows? Okay, we're going to get into some nice controversial topics now. Like, Paulette, the next one's you. What's the next question?
So this is right in my wheelhouse. So I have, I usually take on kind of sensitive social issues. I've had some different things going on in my books. I've had some sexual harassment stuff. I've had some, different racism. I've had, weight, things. So what's your thinking about like trigger warnings and how to address those types of themes in a book without like one, giving them away? I know different authors handle them differently. I've read some, controversial books that didn't mention anything, like the blurb for It Ends With Us doesn't say anything about like anything that's in it. Yep. So I'm just really curious what your thoughts are about trigger warnings.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I think the first thing I'll say, because, the blurb should do some of the heavy lifting in terms of giving readers a heads up as to what the tone is of your book. So I think, like where things like It Ends With Us went wrong is that it sounds like a very fluffy blurb, and there's no hint of any of the heavier themes that are in the book. And there was a fantasy book a while ago that had a blurb. I actually bought the book and I was about to read it, and a friend of mine was like, oh, that one's full of like gore and whatever else. And I was like, oh my God, the blurb sounded like it was not that at all, and I'm not going to be able to deal with that. So, and there was a controversy about that one. They had to put trigger warnings up on their website and everything afterwards because people complained. So I completely understand why people are concerned about it. Two things. One, in terms of the blurb tone, even without specifically saying, oh, there's racism, oh, there's sexual harassment, we can be using vocabulary that indicates like a heaviness or a grit or whatever it is that the atmosphere is around that particular situation. It does get tricky when those things happen deeper into the book and they're technically spoilers and we can't talk about them. However, I do find that it's rare that a book doesn't have any hint of heaviness earlier on. Like there's usually some kind of thread through it, whether it's, I don't know, a deep insecurity in the character that then makes them feel less than, and then they find themselves in this compromising situation and it's even harder for them to get out because they have like no sense of self-worth. Like there are threads often that you can kind of pull on in the blurb to give a hint of, like I say, it's like showing them the path, but just like not what's at the end of it. You can give them a hint of what the tone is. So tone is so important in blurbs, and most of the time when I've read a book and the blurb has been wildly different, it's that the blurb sounds happy or fluffy and the book is gritty and dark, right? Or the opposite, but that's not as common. So that's the first thing we want to make sure we're doing with the blurb, is that it's really aligning with the tone and themes of your book. In terms of trigger warnings, I have very mixed feelings about them personally. I think they are a burden that is placed quite heavily on the shoulders of indie authors almost exclusively. Like I say, the book that I referred to previously was tried published, and the publishers did end up putting trigger warnings on the website and such. But that was after like a lot of complaints. Obviously, there's been a lot of complaints about Colleen Hoover, and people just kind of know it's Colleen Hoover now. So that's the trigger warning, right? Is that it's Colleen Hoover. But I do feel for indie authors because I think because you have this direct line with your readers, I think this is where trigger warnings are sort of coming from, is that you actually bear the brunt of people sending you. It's like me with my email list. Someone can hit reply to any of my emails and be like, you're an idiot. Stop emailing me. Like, that happens sometimes. Most people are very nice, but sometimes people are mean. And so it can be confronting to have that direct line to your audience. And therefore, I completely understand that, you know, trigger warnings can really protect you as an author in a large way. On the flip side, I think a lot of things to do with trigger warnings are very subjective. There are very, very obvious ones, like, you know, sexual assault, for example, or whatever. But I've seen trigger warnings for a broken arm, right? Like, that's genuinely. So for somebody, that's a trigger. For somebody, it's not, right? And then for somebody else, it's a spoiler, and then they're like peeved, right? That you've told them there's a broken arm in there. You've told them, like, there's a whole sort of conversation around it. So.
I guess it depends how many pages it takes to break the arm. I guess if you give me 10 pages of breaking someone's arm, that's pretty horrific torture. And I wouldn't want to know.
This is true. And I mean, it's funny for me because I mean, and like, I suppose you guys relate to this too, is like, I grew up before trigger warnings were a thing. I read books where suddenly something awful happens on like the last page and you're like, oh, okay, I didn't expect that. And I think I tend to be of the opinion that for me personally, it was character building. And I'm not somebody who has triggers. And so trigger warnings aren't necessarily relevant, particularly to me, except I would kind of like to know, I guess, if a book had loads of gore. But I think I'd be fine to come across in the book and be like, no, I'm throwing this one out. I'm not, you know, I'd be okay. I think with the growing awareness of like mental health and all that kind of stuff, I think we're being more sensitive towards these things and acknowledging that people might be in a vulnerable state and want to feel safe picking up books, right? Which is completely fair enough as well. My issue is more that I feel sorry for the indies who like so much is expected. It's like, well, you should have put this in, and smoking is a trigger now, and all this kind of thing that you may or may not think of, and there's no definitive list. It gets very tricky, and I think so much of that blame and stress comes on indies in a way that trad published authors don't necessarily have to deal with, right? Yeah. So in terms of the way trigger warnings are related to the blurb, it can get tricky putting trigger warnings in your like online book description, because then there could be like a whole bunch of words in there that trigger Amazon to be like, whoa, okay, we're not putting this online. So I do tend to advise that trigger warnings go in the front matter so that people can see them with the like see more, right, on Kindle.
Yes.
It's not somewhere in the back. And I also advise, like, if it is really significant triggers or like, you know, content warnings, I do put at the bottom of the blurb content warnings on, you know, page 3 of the book, like click look inside to see, just to kind of direct people there.
Oh, I love that.
Because the other thing is, if they buy the book directly, Kindle very often skips just to page 1. So very often people are reading an ebook, it just skips the front matter anyway. So you're not actually guaranteed for them to see those trigger warnings. And then look, they're going to find some way to blame you for that as well, right? So putting that little thing at the bottom of the blurb to just say full content, you know, trigger warnings on page 3, then people can actually click read more, have a little look and go, yeah, it's for me, or no, it's not.
Clever.
And some people might want to skip the trigger warnings altogether.
Anyone who formats on Atticus, you can choose where your page will start on the look inside. So
that's cool.
So know that, you know, so if you have a freebie or if you have a trigger warning, you put that in. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. I recently bought a book in a bookstore because I usually read digitally. So buying a book for me is like a really big deal. And then I read the back blurb. And then when I started looking at the front, it had lots of things about school shootings and all kinds of, and I was like, this wasn't anywhere. Look at the back of the book. And I had my daughter return the book, you know? So I think you just want to give readers a good experience. So I think the way you're talking about tonality, putting in the front matter, like hinting, I think those are all really good solutions.
Yeah. And it's like I say, I understand the frustration because I've got so many trad examples of blurbs that really give no heads up as to what's happening inside of the book. It is something like my heart goes out to indies because I know it's a lot, but I also really appreciate that you're trying to like really look after your readers. And I think your readers should know how lucky they are to have authors who are actually like going to, you know, author/publishers, right? Because you're doing everything, are going to these lengths to make sure that people can feel safe. I would say in terms of choosing which page your book goes to automatically, like you were saying in Atticus, Paulette, I'd be wary of making it jump straight to the trigger warnings only because I know some people get annoyed at them being spoilers and they want to skip the trigger warnings. So like that's just another consideration. You know, if you have some really, really serious triggers, maybe it's a good idea to go straight there so no one can miss it. But I have seen people whinge that it's also a spoiler. So, you know, you can't please everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Lancey McCall is pointing out that some people also say trigger warnings are on their website, which is another way to do it. To
Yeah,
let people
the
know.
only annoying thing about that, as far as Amazon is concerned, is that you can't put URLs in your Amazon description.
Right.
So then how do you tell them where your website? It's like a journey for you. And they might go,
Right.
I can't be bothered to find your website.
Right.
If it's in the front matter and they can click read more and see it, I feel like it's less of a barrier for them. But look, I know authors who it also works for. So have both if you want as well. That's the other option.
Well, I know we're getting towards the end of our time here, so I'm going to skip to a wonderfully polarizing, contentious question that I actually was going to have Paulette ask, but I'm going to ask it now, which is, what about using AI to write a book blurb? I mean, I'm best friends with Claude. Claude has done some wonderful things for me recently. So, like,
Jessie has left the chat. Look, I'm trying not to be a Luddite. So I'm definitely not an AI expert. I'm sort of coming around to it as an assistive thing. I know that's doing great assistive things for people. My concern is this, right? Is AI is only as good as what it's fed. And there are so many more rubbish book blurbs out there than there are good ones. So if we assume, and I don't know whether ChatGPT is even trained on book blurbs at all. From what I've seen, it really isn't. But like I say, I acknowledge that I don't know all the fancy prompts. But if it's just going to be bad blurb compost of the really, really, and ChatGPT in particular does some very, very specific things with book blurbs. I've used it in my emails before to teach people, like, ChatGPT makes all the same mistakes beginning authors do in their blurb. So then I don't want it. I don't want bad blurb compost. I don't want a whole mishmash of the terrible blurbs that are out there infecting my blurb. I've put my blurbs through improvers, like to put it through AI and like make this better, and it's always made it worse. So that's my experience of it. I will share though that a student of mine who did the Book Blurb Magic course was still sort of struggling a little bit with, his story to get it down to under 200 words. So I think he maybe had 300 or 250 words. And he did use AI. He asked AI to help him cut it down. And while he didn't agree with all of the changes and it didn't do a perfect job, it helped him to see which bits might be less relevant to the blurb. So he used that as help to edit down his blurb. And I think that's a really smart way to use it. I think if you remember that AI is never the finished product, it can help you, but it's never the finished product. You can't just be like, write me a blurb and it's done. Then it can absolutely help. All Book Blurb Magic blurbs are 100% AI free. I don't even use ChatGPT to brainstorm. It's I like everything to come from up here. I guess you could say I like doing everything the hard way, but to me it's really important because I want to connect with the book, and I feel like throwing it into AI pulls me away from my instinctive connection with the material that the author has given me. For me, it's a very, very personal thing. So I think if you are struggling to get your book blurb down to 180 words, let's say, yeah, chuck it into ChatGPT and see if you can get it shorter and see what it suggests. Very often I found that it makes things wordier, so just be careful. But it could be, an interesting signpost, basically, of what needs to go in your blurb. I just am very unconvinced by what I've seen of it so far.
Yeah, and I think one of I use, we use AI a lot at my job, and I think there are a few things that people need to keep in mind if they are using it to kind of rehumanize it afterwards. Make sure that you're varying your sentence lengths, short and long. Make sure that you're using evocative language. Make sure that you're varying your sentence structure. And, so there are some things that you can overlay on top of it if you want to use it as a foundation. But to Jessie's point, it should never be the end product. You need to go back and add the tone, add the flavor, add the mood, make sure you're doing all the things that Jessie's spoken about for the last hour. And, maybe it can be a help for some people, but it won't be as much as a help as Jessie. And, I'm going to be camping on your front step.
Yeah, well, I'll admit that I'm using AI to help with the social media posts for the podcast social media. And some things it does really well is I point it towards the public transcript and I'll say give me 10 interesting things Jessie said in the last hour. And it does very good with that. It'll pull quotes that, would it take me ages to go through and go, what's the most interesting piece of this? And then, in 1 minute, it pulls 20 options. But then you're using your own savvy to say, and I always ask it to give me 30 options. Then you're using your own savvy to say, okay, of those 30, that's the one I think people will be interested in.
Yeah,
so you're still
100%.
You're still not handing it over, right? You're just using it 100%. To try and find things for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great example of, great assistive AI. My concern with using it to write blurbs is, of course, you then have the whole copyright minefield as well. Is it your work? Is it not? And that's another reason why I stay well clear of it. Obviously, providing blurbs to people. It's just, I don't want to open that can of worms.
Yeah. I think the other piece is, remember that Amazon and all these they are algorithms, and they can tell. There are ways, there are structures that they look for in language to kind of sense whether it is AI generated or if it's human generated. And I have to think that the algorithms are going to favor or put more authority behind book blurbs that are written better because they have the human overlay. So you may not be helping yourself in terms of the algorithmic benefits.
Also remember that if readers even suspect that your blurb is AI, you will be publicly crucified. Like, that's just where we're at right now. And I mean, like, they'll assume that your book is all AI. They'll assume that your cover's all AI and I know that some people are being very unfairly accused. It's getting a little bit wild out there. But, if you can steer clear of it, right? Because it's just going to give your book a bad name potentially. And very interestingly, I was reading a study the other day about they tested like university professors looking at student assignments and stuff like that to see if they could detect AI. They reckon that ordinary people can detect AI writing 60 to 70% of the time, which to me is like, what? Like, that's so much more than I thought it would be. And yes, it's at this current stage of AI. Maybe it's going to get freakishly good. Who knows? I might be jobless next year, but like, it's just at the moment it's not there. At the moment it's not there, and people do know. People can feel it.
Yeah. So, Jessie, talk to us through how can people connect with you to have you help them. And when I say people, I mean me.
I love it. Okay. I've got a few options. So you can go to bookblurbmagic.com to see like all of the options. But essentially, we've got the Book Blurb Magic course. Remember, you can get that for just $37 when you go and download my free cheat sheet. I also have the Spicy Blurb Playbook, which is my course specifically for romance authors. And that delves into how to write first person, dual first person, as well as third person romance blurbs specifically. So again, that's on bookblurbmagic.com as well. If you want to work specifically with me, I have two main services. So one is my custom book blurb service, which is totally done for you. It's also booked out until June at this stage. I've actually closed the page at the moment, but you can email me if you would like to go on the wait list. Or you can jump on a one-to-one blurb audit with me, which there are still spots available for from May. April just booked out, but from May onwards, there are spots. Essentially, that's where you hop on a one-to-one like Google Meet call with me. We have your blurb in front of us. So you do have to have a blurb draft to bring. It can be a rubbish one. Like, you don't have to be in love with it. Just your working blurb that you've got at the moment. And essentially, we spend up to an hour working on it. And it's kind of like I'm your assistive AI, right? I'm like, yep, no, right? As we go through, and like 99% of the time, the entire blurb is done within that hour. Sometimes it's done in 20 or 30 minutes. Like, sometimes it's a few tweaks and all of a sudden the whole thing opens up and we're like, yeah, rewrite this, this is perfect, whole new hook. It's very exciting. I love how fast paced it is. I kind of love being put on the spot with that sort of thing. And then regardless of how the call goes, you still have access to me for 2 weeks afterwards inside a shared Google Docs. You can make as many tweaks, you can ask as many questions as you like. It's one of my most popular services because you just get so much one-to-one help. There are strictly only 9 per month though, so they do book out pretty quick. But they're a lot of fun. So I'd love to see you on one, Paulette. And of course, anyone listening,
I'm going to go book now. So, go add one for April. Like, I'm desperate here. Like, you need to add me in April. Like, you need to make space for me, y'all.
I'll put you on the cancellation list.
Thank you. I mean, come on. Let's have a little love over here.
And then for those who are not lucky enough to be on your newsletter, and I'm in awe of your newsletter. I read it. Like, I am in a lot of people's newsletters and I don't read them. Like, every so often I check in because of people I want to stay in contact with, but I can't read everything. But your newsletter is so fun. And I don't know how you find new topics to write about every single freaking day, but you do. And you make me smile and you make me giggle. And that's why I open it. How the heck and how do people find it and sign up?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, if you go to bookblurb.magic.com, you'll get a nice little pop-up that says, "Hey, this is where to sign up." Once you download my free cheat sheet though, you're on the list. Like that's the main way that people get onto my list. And then yeah, you have 5 days a week of blurb tips, and I do once a year teach my email technique as well. So if you're on my list, I only sell it to my list. I think I'm going to be promoting that in October, November. So if you're interested, if you love newsletters and writing emails and you get stuck for things to say, I can teach you my ways. It's emails like my second love beside blurbs. They compete, but I love email marketing.
I know a lot of people are sitting here going like, "Oh, love email marketing."
It's the best. I love it more than social media. More engagement, more genuine relationships, more fun. Like it's just the best. And it can be fun for you too, I promise. Come work with me in October, November.
I think it's worth it just to learn how to make it fun. Like, yeah, I want to know that. So we're at the end of our time here. And I just want to point out that we have some phenomenal topics coming up soon. I'm really excited that Paulette is bringing in a phenomenal expert on Facebook ads. It's been actually, other than book blurbs, our most requested topic so far. People want to learn about advertising. I am not quite sure how we're going to teach advertising on a podcast, but we're going to give it our darn best try. And so that's coming up. We're also going to be talking about controversial topics and writing controversial topics and how to do your book marketing around controversial topics, which is something that Paulette feels very familiar with, but we're going to bring in some other guest authors to kind of share how they did it too. And if you have ideas for us, please send us ideas of what would help you. We're really good at going out, as you saw today, and finding the people that we think are the best expert on a topic. That's why we invited Jessie, and we are so grateful that you joined us. Thank you very much.
It was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Enjoy the rest of the day in Australia.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.